Hello and welcome to another episode of Tech Beyond Gender. Today we are excited to have Michelle Maxwell with us. Michelle is a general manager of colleague enablement in the BNZ technology team. Although we work in the same organization, I haven't had a chance to learn much about her, except that she's incredibly passionate about diversity and inclusion initiatives within the bank. An interesting tidbit: Michelle transitioned from a career in education to the technology sector. So, if you're a teacher thinking about making a move into tech, this episode is definitely for you. Welcome, Michelle, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Mina. Yeah, I think I would expand that to say if you are anybody who's thinking about a career change, fun story. When I did start at the bank, I'd had a 20-year career in teaching. Started off as a primary school teacher and over the years of my teaching, worked in many countries and in many different jobs, many different levels. So when I quit teaching and came back to New Zealand, decided I was going to see what the corporate world was like. I was about to turn 40. And I happened in the year or so after I joined the bank to be in a session where a senior executive made a comment in that meeting that, and it was a career development meeting. It was all about, boosting people's ideas about growing their careers and what they want to do next. And he made the comment that if you're not already well on your way in your career to where you want to be by the time you turn 40, you're stuffed. And I, and I remember laughing. And he sort of looked at me and said, "Do you think that's funny?" And I said, "Well, I do, given that I changed careers at 40. And I think, I am going back 16 years now that I've been with the bank. But what was really interesting for me was that perception that you've got a progression that you outline in your career and you go from A to B to C to D and you get to where you're going. And for some people, that is the way they operate and that is the way they think. But for so many of us, it's more of, and I've always talked about a lattice. And you move all over the place and you do all sorts of different things. And I did that in my teaching, and I've done that since I've been at the bank. And I've had the opportunity to have a lot of different roles in different areas. And I've gone from projects to finance to governance to, back into tech. And by doing that, you gain this life experience and you bring so much into the role that you don't necessarily have to be technical to be a technical leader. You don't necessarily have to have the core experience. And so, there's a lot of learnings that I've had along the way around not assuming because you can't do everything, not assuming because you haven't done that thing before that you can't do it if you're bringing that wider experience. So I thought that was pretty funny. But yes, I've had a wide and varied career to date. And I love every minute of it because I like being challenged. And so for me, leaping from one thing to another and having that challenge and constantly growing and changing is something that I think my parents used to despair of growing up in the age of you stay in the same job or at least the same company forever. I've always done that. I've done it as a child and I've done it as an adult where I need a new challenge. It's time to look at something else. So yeah, that's a little bit, I guess, about my past.
Yeah, well, I want to know more about your past. So, how did it all begin? Like, just give me a rundown of your whole career journey. How was teaching for you? How long did you teach? And you also mentioned that you traveled quite a bit, right?
Mm, Yeah, so I was when I was at high school, I wasn't somebody who was perceived as a high performer. I wasn't somebody who was perceived as putting the time in to be a high performer. There were too many interesting things for me to be involved in. I was spreading myself fairly thin, I think it was the way I would put that. My guidance counsellor, I vividly remember at the school I was at, handed me a form when I was in the seventh form and said, "Here, fill this in, go and be a teacher. You haven't come up with anything else, go and be a teacher." I was kind of like, okay, well, sure. I haven't thought of anything else, so I'll give it a go. I've made a lot of assumptions along the way in my life about when I decide to do something, I expect it's just going to happen. And I have a very positive mindset. I have a very growth mindset. And so if I decide something is worth my while putting some energy into, I generally will put a lot of energy into it, and I will put a lot of enthusiasm into it, but I'll also assume that it's all going to go my way. I was very fortunate that that did go my way, and I did get accepted to Teachers College. Then my first job, and I came out of Teachers College at a time when it was actually very hard to get a job as a teacher. We had a glut of teachers in those days. And so you pretty much were taking a job wherever you could find it. And so I applied for a job and got it in Warkworth. And I was from Masterton in the bottom of the North Island. I'd gone to Teachers College in Wellington and had no idea where Warkworth was. So after they accepted me in the position, I then looked it up to see where it was, found it was north of Auckland. And so, yeah, that began my journey, which kind of, I think, talks to a little bit who I am and how I operate. If the job looks good and I think it's a great opportunity, the wheres and wherefores don't actually matter. I'll just leap into it, boots and all. So I was there for 4 years, a really great grounding for me as a teacher. And from there, I went to Tamahere Model Country School, which is on the outskirts of Hamilton, for 2 years. And that was, as a model school, it was attached to the Teachers College there. And so we had students and we were helping support the growth and development of students, teacher students. So that was great. It made me become a lot more ordered than perhaps I had been, a lot more rigor perhaps in my day-to-day routines. From there, I got the opportunity through a colleague that I was working with to apply for a role overseas in Brunei. And so, again, I was fortunate and I got the role as a primary school teacher in Brunei. We were establishing a brand new school over there. So I did 3 years there, which was a huge amount of fun and lots of stories to tell there that I won't waste time on right now. But there are a lot of stories around, building up a new school and understanding what all the things that needed to be done to develop into that. And in actual fact, that was where it was a very technologically advanced school, and we had to do emails, and the emails were very new in those days. That's how far back I'm going. And they told us we had to check our emails twice a day. And I remember we were all sitting there going, why on earth would you do that twice a day? Like, seriously, why would you do that? And they had to teach us how to check our emails, which just seems hilarious now, because I think kids are just born with that innate knowledge nowadays as part of our evolution. But, we had to learn how to do it. From there, I went to Germany and I got a job in Potsdam. And I started off there as a primary school teacher, but after about 3 months, I challenged the school around the fact that they had an a capable computer lab set up and nobody was using it. There were no IT lessons. The kids weren't having exposure to it. So I got told, well, sure, if you want to do it, you go do it. Create a curriculum and away you go. So I did. I went and developed the curriculum based on, a lot of other people, and worked with a lot of other people to do that, and was teaching sort of everything from kindergarten through to high school with IT. So that was my foray into IT. And from there, I went to Oman and I went to the Sultan School. And I was there for 6 years. I loved it, absolutely loved it. And I was leading the IT department there. And it was great because there was a huge amount of investment happening there, which was fantastic. And that was sort of my first experience with I guess something that had never been a factor for me, and that was that assumption that as a female, I would struggle to lead males. And I guess what was really interesting was I was in a male-dominated industry in terms of IT, but a female-dominated industry in terms of teaching. I was in a school that was in a Muslim country. And as a female, my male principal told me that he felt that perhaps it wouldn't be a good idea to have a female head of in that area, and that he'd go out and recruit a new head of IT. To which my response was, you can do that, but make sure if you find somebody, you get 2 people, because I will leave. I won't stay to report to somebody else just because I'm a female. He went out recruiting, and I don't know whether it was my threat. I don't know whether it was because he couldn't find anybody, but he didn't come back having hired anybody. He did admit to me that he was keeping me on. I
That
said,
sounds
okay,
more
well,
like a curse than a threat.
well, it was really interesting, because at the time, for me, there are these moments in your career where you discover what your principles are, and you discover that they are important to you. And this was one of those moments. And I'd had a couple of those previously, where you don't know until it happens how you're going to respond, and the approach you're going to take to that. But for me, it was I think I'm doing a good job. If I'm not doing a good job, you tell me I'm not doing a good job, and then let's have that conversation. If you're telling me that it's because I'm a female, then do you want to go and talk to the team of men who are working for me and how they feel about it? Because I think they're pretty happy, which they were. So anyway, I ended up being there for 6 years, and it was an amazing job. And he did acknowledge that he was wrong in his assumption. And I think it was, as a male coming into a Muslim country, he made an assumption that Muslim men wouldn't want to work with a Western female, which was so far not the truth. And, it was a great country to live in as a Western female. So, it was interesting to see how assumptions can be made on both sides of the fence. And from there, when I decided that I didn't want to be a teacher anymore, I came back to New Zealand. As I said, I got a job at BNZ. In those days, I didn't know what I could do. I had no idea what I could do in the corporate world. I didn't know what my teaching skills would bring into this environment. I'd come from a world where, you couldn't just walk out anytime. You couldn't. I used to joke, and everybody when I started here would laugh. I would announce every time I wanted to go. I was going to the bathroom, because as a teacher you couldn't do that. You could only go when you were on a break. You couldn't leave the classroom. And so there were these real cultural changes for me, which were like, wow, you mean I can go out at lunchtime and do something that I need to do for myself? Because that was not a world that I'd been in. So that was quite a culture change for me. But I came in as a project coordinator, which I had always said that I am not driven by status. I'm not driven by money. As a teacher, you can't really be driven by money. That's not a high-paying career to have. And I was always very proud of the fact that I wasn't driven by those things. But when I joined the bank at, coming up 40, as a project coordinator, this is going to sound terrible, but I suddenly felt like, do people really think that this is the best I can do? Do people think I've done 20 years of my career and this is the level I'm working at? Which sounds really derogatory towards the amazing people who do that job, because after doing it for a few months, holy moly, is that a big job? And I learned so much about the bank in that job. I learned about how the bank operates. I learned about how to get things done. I learned so much. It was a really great grounding. But I realised actually I was quite status oriented, and my personal brand and my personal status suddenly were like, oh, I'm not sure how I feel about this. I'm not sure how I feel about others feeling about me about this. So that was another one of those pivotal moments for me, where I had to think about, I don't know, is status important to me? And if it is, what am I going to do about that? So yeah, that was another really interesting turning point for me. I've been here for 16 years at the bank, and I think I counted 11 roles. And so I maybe am still a little bit leapfrogging around. Some of those has just been title changes and predominantly the same role, but effectively, functionally, I've worked, like I said, in projects as a coordinator and an analyst, and led some of the agile rollout when we were doing agile way back in 2009. I moved into finance, and I was a finance partner looking after some of the strategic programs of work, looking after their cost and benefit management. I did that for a few years. I went into the digital team as the performance and operations manager, ended up heading up the capability and performance teams. And then I decided it was time to challenge myself to really get into the world of tech and understand a little bit more about that. So I became a head of tech and looked after our enterprise services domain, which looked after, I guess, all of the corporate function tech within the bank. And from there, I've had the opportunity now to 18 months ago, move into this role as GM for colleague enablement, which is something I'm super passionate about, and making sure that our colleagues have a really great work experience is the best we can do. So, yeah, you asked for it.
I enjoy listening to this story because, like, I feel you didn't transition to tech in the recent years. You actually
No.
transitioned to tech in Brunei, right?
Yes,
Like when
that's
you
true.
were,
That's true.
yeah, yeah, and Brunei, and then in Germany, and then in Oman. Like you were in tech, partially in
Oh,
tech.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
transition really happened when you were working in the education sector itself, right?
Well, that's right. And I was fortunate enough because education was transitioning and learning about tech at that time. And so that was where I got the opportunity to go on that journey. So yes, you're right. We learned a whole lot about tech, and I did my thesis all around the use of tech in education, because in those days everybody saw it as a bad thing, and that students shouldn't be using computers, and kids couldn't learn to read using the ebooks that were online. Which, my thesis was all about that, and proved to be the fact that certainly for English as a foreign language students, it was a huge help to them. So yeah, so it was quite a pivotal time in education. Yeah.
And also, you just briefly touched on it, how education is like all dominated by women, and it's just the reverse in technology. So, what were your observations? And you also mentioned how you found it quite intriguing that you could just have a lunch break and do what you wanted to do, right? So, similarly, like what were the real differences, significant differences between the two sectors?
Oh wow, so many, so many. I think the the big difference for me, and I guess you can look at it at a couple of different levels, because you've got the difference in how you personally operate, and then you've got the difference around what the accountabilities are. And so I used to sometimes be completely terrified as a teacher, because every now and then it would dawn on me the responsibility that was on me as a teacher, and thinking about this is the future generation that I'm having a hand in making sure they can read and write and add and be good citizens. And every now and then I would absolutely freak out about it and think I am the wrong person for this. This is way too much responsibility for me, and it would absolutely freak me out on occasion, because it's a huge responsibility.
Which year
And I
were the
used
kids? How old were the kids?
well, when I first started teaching, I was teaching 5 and 6-year-olds.
Wow.
But over the years, I've taught everything from 3-year-olds through to first year university, 18, 19-year-olds. So
Wow.
over the years, I've had the opportunity to teach the whole range. And so, yeah, I used to say they learned despite me. Despite anything I did, children learn. They're sponges. They just absolutely absorb it. And so I don't have that fear in a corporate environment. You have a lot of great people who are coming together to deliver an outcome. And so it's a very different, and I guess now in my role as a GM, I probably have a little bit more of that feeling of, oh, wow, this is a big responsibility on me to make sure I'm enabling my people and the teams who are working for us to do great work and to deliver on great outcomes. And so now probably is the first time I'm starting to get a little bit of that, well, they're all great people and they'll probably do the right thing, even if I'm not 100% right in what I'm doing. And I've got a little bit of that, maybe that fear of not being able to support them in the right way. But for me, it's all about the leadership and enabling. And I think whether you're talking about teaching or whether you're talking about the corporate environment, it's all about leadership. And I think that's one of the big transferable skills. You know, people talk soft skills. I don't call it soft skills. It's not a soft skill. It's a very, very, very big, strong skill that people have, and teachers have it up the wazoo. Because they have to, because of the you don't choose to teach these children. You've got to deal with, and you have personality conflicts with children that you have to teach. You've got to work out how to manage that. You've got to work out how to lead through that. And so a lot of those skills are the ones that I bring back in. And certainly over the years, I've been told that I haven't lost my teacher look. And I've been told I've used that on occasion if I'm not happy about the way something's going. So I think, yeah, there's certainly a lot of transferable skills that you bring across, a lot of similarities and a lot of great difference.
Yeah, coming to think of it, right? Because I had a very brief stint as a lecturer in Fitterea Polytechnic soon after I finished my graduation, actually. And I
Great.
remember, like, you actually work and deal with people who are disengaged or who just don't want to listen to you. But it's just a
Yeah.
matter of working with them, speaking to them in their language so you get some sort of cooperation, right? So that in itself is such an important skill set to
Mm.
have.
Mm. Yeah, I think one of the things that I use a lot and have used a lot over the last few years is working out that the way I'm trying to get a message across is maybe not working, and knowing that I've got a number of different tools in my toolkit around how I can change the messaging, change the approach, change the language, change the style, so that you're and it's interesting because you said in the intro about my passion for diversity, equity, and inclusion. I would never in the past have said that that was something that I was passionate about, but I realize now that it's actually because as a teacher, you have to account for those things, and you are constantly accounting for different ways of learning, different ways of thinking, different ways of operating. And you're constantly working out, how do I teach you this thing in a way that works for you? And you're constantly adapting how you do that. And so I think I do it just naturally. But it's one of those skills that gets called out. And I think it's a really important skill. And if you could bottle it and help other people learn it, it would take us a long way forward around that whole agenda around diversity, equity, and inclusion, because for me, they're things that come naturally, and they're things that I passionately believe we should all be thinking about. Um, but I'm also a little bit my own worst enemy in that I am a I'm I can be a force of nature. I am fairly strong-willed. I'm fairly strong-natured. I'm fairly loud, and I'm ebullient. I remember the first time that word got used by a principal. In fact, the first principal who hired me, who talked about how ebullient I was, and I had to go away and look that word up. I was worried it was not complimentary, which I don't think it was the way he used it, but I'm taking it as a compliment. But you know, I have this energy, and not everybody copes with that. And I need to make sure that I balance that and pare that back for those people who it's just too overwhelming with that, you know, that completely in your face enthusiasm. But equally, I don't sit in a room and feel the same pressure that many women feel, because I don't allow myself to. I grew up with brothers. I grew up in a very male dominated environment, and with a very strong mother. And so I will sit in a room, and I do remember one leadership team that I sat on here at the bank where um, I had people saying to me, "Oh, you're the only female in the room. Like, how does that feel?" I'm like, "Am I?" It didn't even occur to me, because I didn't feel I didn't have a voice. But that's where I have to actually be really mindful of, not everybody feels that way. Not everybody has that strength or that confidence to wade in. Um, and so that's where, for me, I actually have to balance myself the other way.
Yeah, it is interesting, right? Even in the introduction, when you spoke about how at the age of 40, you decide closer to 40, you just decided to change career. And there was someone who was saying how you should have figured out everything by then. I'm just thinking, like, especially, I come from India, where you sort of have this manual saying, like, by this age, you finish your university. By this age, you start working. You should be married by this age. You should have your first child by then. You should have had your bought your first home by then and stuff,
Yeah.
right? So in that
Yeah.
case, there's so much pressure. So you just sort of feel, say, by the age of 25, if you haven't figured out your career, then you are like literally a loser, or like you can't change your
Yeah.
career in your 30s. It's almost impossible. Like, how can you change? What is your perspective on that?
Oh my God, I'm just about ready for my next career change. I just, my perspective on that is it's complete rubbish that you can't change your career, because for me, it's all about your mindset. It's absolutely about the support that you get from others. It's absolutely about, and depending on the different situation that you're in, if you are the sole breadwinner in your family and you've got a mortgage to pay and you've got kids that you're putting through school, then you're in a very different position to somebody who has no children, no strings, no ties, and they can just up and do whatever they like. And, I'm fortunate that's me. And so I have very strong family ties. I have very great friendships, but I can up and go whenever I fancy. I can, so I think it very much is that's one of the factors that people need to and do bring into that decision. But for me personally, the moment, and I did jokingly say before I got this role actually, that maybe it was time for a career change. I'd had, 15 years in the bank, and maybe I should be thinking about what's next. And one day I may do that. It's not today, and it's probably not going to be tomorrow because I'm loving what I'm doing. But for me, that's what it's all about. And it's about identifying where your passions are, or getting an opportunity that might be something that looks interesting and will give you an opportunity to try something different. So I think for me, it's never too late. It's never too late to have a career change. I was talking to somebody today who is the opposite to me, and they've been in tech all of their career, but they're kind of saying, I was kind of thinking maybe in a semi-retirement mode, I could go and be a teacher. And so we do see a lot of people who do it that way as well, because they realize that they've got a passion for helping children and for teaching and for imparting knowledge. And so, I think I would never rule out changing careers. I would absolutely never rule it out. But you've got to be brave, I guess. For me, it's just it's a natural. I've had enough of where I am. I've had enough of what I'm doing, so it's time for a change. And if you look at my career since I left home, whether it's where the country I'm living in, the town I'm living in, the job I'm doing, the age I'm teaching, the role I'm playing, I change that all the time because I'm a person who needs that constant. Well, that doesn't make me sound very good, does it? But I need that constant challenge. I need that constant growth, and so that's how I get it. That's what does it for me. By the same token, I super admire those people who are in a role, have been in a role or a job for a long time. They love it. They add value, and I admire them for that, because they are enjoying that and they get the challenge that they need. And for me, that's what it's all about. It doesn't matter whether you're chopping and changing roles. It doesn't matter whether you're staying in the same role. It's about, do you have the challenges that allow you to continue to grow, to continue to add value, and to continue to feel valued?
Mm.
And that for me is what makes it important. And I guess that brings it back to my whole, for me, my whole ethos around being a good leader. And that's what's important. Doesn't matter what job you do, doesn't matter what role you're playing, you can always be a leader.
Cool. I feel teachers are natural leaders. I never thought about it until this conversation, but like now thinking about it, right? Like how with kids you have to just manage kids. It's not just one or two you're dealing with. You're dealing with multiple kids, like multiple age groups. And it's not just the kids, you're dealing with your school principal, with your work colleagues, and whatnot, right? So the skills that you get from being a teacher will actually set you up really well to be a corporate leader.
Oh, for sure. Equally, I think as a teacher, you are in your classroom, and while you've got a curriculum and you've got rules and you've got regulations and you've got all of that stuff, within that classroom, you're the boss. Within that classroom, you're the top of that pyramid. And there's a little bit of ego, I think, that comes into that. Maybe not for everybody. Maybe it was just me. But there's a little bit of you own that whole environment. And so, yeah, you are constantly dealing with all of those things. But equally, you come into a corporate environment and suddenly there's so many different hierarchical layers around you, above you, below you, beside you. There are people who are strongly hierarchical. There are people who are not. There are people who are good leaders. There are people who are not. And so suddenly you're in the open environment, and it becomes quite different in that sense. So the leadership skills are transferable, but I think the way you utilize them changes, and I think you need to adapt them, and you need to continue to grow them. But I would say that about anything, to be honest. You need to keep growing and adapting and changing, because that's the way I operate. So I guess that's it for me. But I think one of the big things for me that I discovered coming into a corporate environment is around the network. In a school and as a teacher, you don't necessarily, you have your immediate network of teachers, and you'll know some teachers, and you do grow your network to a certain extent. But within a corporate environment, that networking is so important, and having the advocacy and the mentoring and the networking, that's how you grow your career. And so cycling all the way back to that whole, ladder versus lattice and how you grow your career. For me, one of the things that I am super passionate about, and I've done a number of talks about, is ensuring that you focus on building your own network, growing that network, making sure that you know who is the person who is your advocate, who is the person that is going to say that you are the best person for that next job, who is the person who is your sponsor, and who is the person who is just absolutely going to be driving you and driving your career and really helping you out with that. And who's your mentor? So you need your mentor, you need your advocate, and you need your sponsor. And you need to make sure you know who those people are. You need to build up your own personal board of people, and you have your boardroom. And those are the people who are helping you grow your career. And regardless of whether you're trying to go up, go across, expand, no matter what you're trying to do, making sure that you don't let your network fester, and that you're constantly reaching out, reconnecting, having a coffee, going for a walk, chatting, keeping that network going is how you build out all of those other roles. And building out those other roles is how you get your next role. For a lot of people, there are very few roles that I've, through my career at the bank, have actually applied for. A lot of them, it's been because I've had a broad network where people have gone, oh, she'd be quite good in this. Let's see how she goes in this role. And so you've got those advocates and those supporters who are spotting things and going, I know who'd be good at that. And so that's what I try and talk to people about here in the bank and outside, is making sure people know who is your sponsor, who's your advocate, who is your mentor. And so I've got a whole big spiel about all of those things. But for me, those are really key to growing your career.
So, who is an advocate and who is a sponsor? Who is a mentor? What's the difference between them?
Yeah, good question. So from my perspective, and I will say this is very much a layman's perspective, I am not a trained career coach, but from my perspective, a mentor is very clear, and your mentor is your person that you can go to and talk to about everything that's going on for you in a work situation. And they are the people that you can talk about the challenges that you have at work, the opportunities that you have at work, the situations that you don't know how to deal with. They are the people who can challenge you to grow your thinking, and they will challenge you to evolve in the way you're operating. So that is a person who is there to support you, help grow your career, but they're not actually necessarily out there trying to find your next role for you. Whereas someone who is your advocate is the person who says, Mina, she's amazing. Do you know she's doing all of these podcasts? Do you know what she's doing over there and they know all the things you're doing. They know how you operate, and they are talking about you. That advocate thinks you're amazing, and they're telling everybody that you're amazing. And then your sponsor is the person who says, I think you're ready for your next role, and I'm going to help you get that role. And they are the person who is out there looking, and they're the person who says, tap, 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 come and have a look at this role, because I think you should apply for that. I think you'd be really good in this role. Or they're saying to a hiring manager, I think you need to go and have a look at that person, because I think they'll be really good in that role. So for me, those are the three different levels of those, and they're all really important. You don't have all of them all of the time. They pop up and in and out of your life at different times, depending on what your focus is and what you're doing. But I think the key for me is keep reaching out to people, grow that network, keep talking to people, because that is how you evolve those roles.
So, how do you find a sponsor or an advocate? Like, should this person necessarily be someone with whom you have worked closely in a role? Or how do you find them? How do you spot them?
Yeah, it takes a little bit of thinking, and it takes a step back to challenge you. And I know, so there's an activity that I run when people ask about this, and I ask them to make a list of all the people who are important in their life right now. And then I ask them to put, what is the role they play? Is this your child? Is it your partner? Is it your parent? Is it your friend? Is it your, and you list them out. And then you start to go, okay, with your interactions with this person, and if we remove family and we look at your friends and your colleagues and where they're sitting, and if you go through those roles and you start to look at them and you say, what's my relationship with this person? And this is where it starts to become very interesting, because you start to look at them and go, oh, I'm kind of that person's agony aunt. They come to me all the time with their problems. Oh, do I go to them with my, no, I don't go to, okay. And you start to think about what is the relationship that you have with these people. So it's actually quite a confronting exercise to do, is to sit there and go through that and look at all of those and see the roles. So from there, I actually do an exercise around, okay, who are the people you need to help you with your career? So your advocate, your sponsor, who's in your network? Who are the people who are your friends at work versus the people who are your antagonists? Because we all have them. Because sometimes they also bring out the best in you as well. Because they challenge your way of working or your way of thinking, they can bring it. So there's quite an exercise that you go through to mark out. And so you start to understand who the people are that are in your life and the role that they play. From there, you pull out the ones that are in your network, and then you work through, are they a senior leader? So to your point about, does an advocate or a sponsor have to be someone you've worked closely with? They need to be someone who you've worked closely enough with that they can advocate for you. They know you well enough to know the things you're good at, the things that you will bring to a role, or the things that you're looking for in your next role. Often an advocate might be a past boss or a past colleague. It may be someone who's been a mentor or even a mentee for you. And those are the people who have gotten to know you in an environment, and they go, oh, you know what? Try that person. So yes, they do need to know you well enough that they can be that advocate or that sponsor for who you are.
Now, thinking about myself, right, about my career and about my work and BNZ and stuff. Now, I see a lot of the leaders who are just so busy.
Mm.
Like people come in and we get into Teams call most of the time soon after we land in. Otherwise, we are in meeting rooms most of the time, and it's almost home time by the time we finish our meetings. And hybrid working hasn't really helped much in a way because you say you're here for 3 days a week, the 3 days you are pretty much stationed to your desk, and then you sort of catch up with your work friends, not necessarily your advocates or sponsors. I'm just thinking, okay, there could possibly be some advocates and sponsors, but everyone seems to be busy. Like we all have our own deadlines. We are just constantly battling and chasing the next job and what we need to do and the milestones that we need to achieve. I just feel like how is it possible for me to achieve that with
Mm.
hybrid working at
Yeah.
especially, right?
Yep. Yeah, and that's a great question because, and that was one of the call outs that we had around people working from home was that we can't help you grow your career because we don't know you. I don't know who you are other than on a Teams call. And so I think we've lost the art of picking up the phone and calling and chatting to people. We've lost the art of walking around and chatting to people on the floor. We've lost the art of catching up in the cafe. And so for me, like I'm in most days a week, not because I have to be, but because I want to be, because there are people who are only in 3 days a week. And if I'm only in a couple of days a week, chances are I'm not going to see them. And so for me, there's a couple of aspects to that. And one is that for those people who are in senior positions, they need to be visible and they need to make time and they need to walk the floor and they need to stop and talk to people. I try and do that as much as I can. It's really hard. And very often, all it takes is as you're racing from one meeting to the next, and as you're moving from one meeting room to the next, you see somebody and actually taking the time to stop and say, hello, how are you? And wait to hear the answer rather than zoom past and hi, how you doing? And keep going.
Mm.
Like that moment of stopping and connecting with someone is so powerful. And so I think whether you're a senior leader or not, taking that time to and sometimes being brave enough to stop and say hello is the step it needs. I will also say it takes work to grow your network and to develop your advocates and your sponsors. You have to make a concerted effort. It doesn't happen if you don't try.
Mm.
And so you have to find a way to make your lunchtime a time that you are sitting amongst other people, or you are taking a walk to another floor, or you are, asking someone to meet you for a coffee, or you are, those are the things that you actually have to make an effort to do, because you just can't grow your advocacy if people don't know who you are. And I think if they know who you are through your work, that's one lens through the outputs and the outcomes that you're delivering. But that's only one part of it. And for me, there's very much more about who you are and what your principles are and who you are as a person and how you operate and all of those things which you want somebody to see. So it is a really hard question because there's no easy answer to it. And it is very much, and one of the things that I've been thinking about is people think it's easier for me because I am an extrovert to reach out to people and say, hey, I'm here, this is who I am, this is what I do. Let's have a chat. It is the hardest thing on earth. And it is very hard to walk into a meeting room where you don't know anybody, or to walk into a function where you don't know anyone, or you only know a few people. And how do you kick off that conversation, or you don't know them well? And it is incredibly hard. And I'm even as an extrovert, it's very, very hard. So as an introvert, I imagine it's even harder. Although I have one friend who's an introvert who absolutely excels at that because they're interested in people. And so it's energy sapping for them to do it, but they're interested and they do an amazing job of it. So I think, it's very easy for us to put those labels on, to say, oh, you're an extrovert, it's easy for you, and I'm an introvert, so it's hard for me. For me, it's actually around your curiosity, and it's around your desire to know and that growth mindset. But I'm talking, in a perfect world, because it's always hard. It's always hard to make the time, make the energy, and make the effort. But that's what it takes. That's absolutely what it takes. And as a senior leader, for someone to come and talk to me, I love that. I love that. And I don't think there's any senior leader who doesn't want to hear from people. There is no senior leader who will be upset if you come to them and say, have you got a minute? I'd love to have a chat with you. And if they say no, don't take offense by it, because they are busy, and say, well, that's cool. I understand you're busy right now. Could we chat later? It's the same about finding yourself a mentor, finding someone who aligns to your principles and aligns to what it is that you're trying to develop, and going to them and saying, hey, you know what? I've been thinking I'd really like to have a mentor, and I'd love to have you as my mentor. Everybody, the first time I got asked that, I was like, wow, that's amazing. It's amazing that someone would want me to do that for them. I don't know what I can offer, but sure, let's give it a go. But sometimes they don't have the time to do it. If they've already got 2, 3, 4, 5 mentees, they may not have the ability. But there's no harm in asking, and it's not a personal affront to you if they say, look, I'm really sorry, I've already got a couple of mentees and I just don't have the bandwidth. But if I've got space, I will. Or actually, I know someone else who might be really good for you. So there's no harm in asking. It's not a person. We can't take it personally if people say no because they're busy. But we've still got to be brave about saying, you know what, I think I'd like to do this. And so, yeah, and that's the hardest thing to do is that being brave and letting someone know that actually I'd like to work a little bit closer with you. Most people will be honoured. Most people will love it, and they would do their best that they can to be able to do that with you.
So, what roles have mentors, sponsors, and advocates played in your career?
Big roles, to be honest. I would say that my career is where it is because I have had advocates and sponsors who back me, so that when I get something wrong, they know that it's something that it was a faux pas, it was oops, I got that wrong. You get a second chance. And so I think I've been very fortunate that I've had a range of roles that have exposed me to a wide range of people in the organisation. But I've also made the effort to create those relationships and develop those relationships. They, I would say, are really pivotal. They are not the only thing. Like, your work still has to speak for itself, and your behaviours still have to speak for themselves. You still have to evidence all of those things. By evidencing those things, that's how you create those sponsors and advocates. And yeah, my career has, I would say, every single role that I have got, it is because I've got people who have seen what I've done and believe that I've got more in me. And that's a really amazing and empowering position to be in.
Great. I remember when you started off, you did talk, like briefly touched on personal brand,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, what is personal brand? Like, did you actually consciously work on creating a personal brand in tech sector once you moved to the bank? Or is that something that you've always been conscious about? Personal brand and status is something you mentioned about. Are they two
Yes,
different words? Like,
they
obviously,
are
they're
two different
words.
words.
What does it mean
Definitely.
for you? Yeah, okay. Would you like to talk about that?
If you can't stop me talking, Mina, you know that. Look, the status and the personal brand are two very different things in my view. And so your how you feel about status is how other people perceive you, but from a hierarchical perspective, I believe, from how I looked at it. Whereas your personal brand is your principles, your behaviors, your intent, your relationships, and your way of working. And so for me, what was really interesting for me was in the bank, like I said, I was fortunate enough to have a number of roles where I was interacting with a wide range of people. And so, by virtue of that, I was creating a personal brand and I wasn't aware of it. I wasn't aware. And so, it was when I was first in the bank and I wasn't aware, A, of the importance of it, or B, how much it was enabling me. And it just meant that I would, if there was a problem, I'd pick up the phone. I knew who to call. I knew who to talk to. I knew how to resolve a problem. I knew who would help me with the next step. When I then got a role that became quite insular, and I realized sort of 2 years into the role that my network had shrunk massively and I hadn't nurtured all of those relationships that I'd had. And I suddenly realized that I couldn't just pick up the phone and talk to somebody to solve it. And and I remember having this conversation with my manager at the time and saying, I've just realized that I've got a really small network now. And he said to me at the time, yeah, you need to do something about that. Like, they don't even know who you are over on that floor. And I'm like, that's weird. And so I made a concerted effort then to start getting back out and talking to people and recreating. And that was, for me, a pivotal time when I realized that you need to take the time to nurture and grow and support your own network, which is how you develop the sponsors and the advocates.
Yeah. Now, obviously, with COVID, things would have changed, right? It's like we just started to be in our bubbles. And I think that mindset hasn't really changed, even though we make an effort to be in the office for 3 days a week. Uh, it is still very acceptable to have teammates in other cities.
Yep.
So how do you resolve for that? Like, I work in a team where most of my teammates are in Wellington. The projects I'm working on, most of them are in Wellington. And I do feel I'm missing out on a whole lot of conversations too by not being there in person.
Mm.
So when in such situations, creating a network can be a challenge because of
Yep.
also time constraints, because I'm here and most of the time I'm in Teams talking to
Mm.
someone or attending a meeting. So, and again, as you mentioned, right, if we don't really pick up, we lost the art of picking up a phone. Literally, there's no phone
Mm.
anymore.
Mm.
And the Teams calls are very purposeful and very intent. It has an intent, and you just go on a call for an intent. So,
Yep.
how do you resolve those issues of networking, right? Like, thinking about networking, my network is just so small, entirely small. Like, for me now, as I'm talking to you, I'm just realizing, oh my God, there's so much that I need to do as well. So, how do you do? What would be the first step in that case?
I jokingly used to say, and still say, during COVID, I discovered my inner introvert, and I loved working from home, and I discovered how enjoyable that was. But then I realized that when I came back into the office, I felt way more optimistic and realized what the value for me of being in the office is, and that's not the same for everybody. But I think when you're talking about your network, you're right. You know, there's a lot of cross-desk conversations that you miss out on when your team is in a different city. And I have some of my teams. My teams are split between Auckland and Wellington as well, and I understand that. And I've been in a team where I was the only person in Wellington, and my whole team was in Auckland, and that was really difficult. It was pre-COVID, but I would say one of the advantages that we've got post COVID is that we utilize chat a lot more. There's a whole lot more back channeling whenever you are in a meeting. You would never have done that in the old days. You would never have been emailing and messaging while you were in a meeting. COVID has given us the permission to do that. So we're not paying attention. So I think we meet way more than we used to, and we need to try and pull that back. We definitely need to try and pull that back. One of the things I would say about being in a different city to your teams and your sponsors and your wider group that you're working with, the projects that you're doing, that sort of thing. One of the things that I definitely would say is, yeah, sure, you're going to miss some of the cross-desk conversations, but that's where you actually need to make an effort to pick up the phone and call somebody and say, hey, no agenda, just ringing for a chat. How are things going? What's going on with this? Or, hey, I noticed you looked a bit stressed in the last meeting. Anything I can help with? And that is something I used to do and still do. I started doing during COVID, and I still try and do it, where I will call people. And I had colleagues who would ring me and go, yeah, nothing to talk about, just ringing to see how you're going. And I'm like, I'm so busy, don't bother me. But actually it was great because they were taking the time to reach out. And so it goes back to my point around networking takes effort. Keeping connected takes effort. And so you can do it from being in a different city, but you're right, you're never going to have the same cross-desk conversations. But chat enables us to be very, very close to a lot of those conversations, and having those running Teams chats where, you've got that stream of consciousness going for people, that's really enabled a lot of that water cooler conversation. But I think the other point that I would make, though, is that your network doesn't need to just be the people you work directly with. And when you are in Auckland and your team is in Wellington or vice versa, or wherever you happen to be, one of the key things is making sure that you are getting to know the people who are on the same floor as you, and getting to know the people who are on other floors. And by virtue of that, growing the relationships that you have and taking the time to reach out to them as well. Those, it's harder. There's no two ways about it. It's harder, but it's still very, very important. And it just takes effort.
Yeah, absolutely. I just realized how close, or like how comfortable I became with my own self during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I
Mm-hmm.
came back to the floor, it was like, oh my God, they all are strangers now. How do I start with a conversation? Yeah,
Right.
it was a big, huge thing, especially for I'm an introvert, so I can just relate to that. Now, imposter syndrome.
Oh, yes.
Having moved from education sector to tech sector, and again in the bank, or several different roles, and you said you love challenges and stuff. How have you experienced imposter syndrome at
Oh,
all, or have you always been this enthusiastic, bubbly self where like, okay, I can do anything I want?
I think I've always had a level of confidence that was over sort of that I don't think I really deserved, but I've always had a level of confidence that was just innate to who I am, and a belief that is innate to who I am. But yeah, absolutely. I think what was interesting for me is that when I had imposter syndrome, it was when I moved into the finance team. And the first role that I had there called me a project accountant. And I remember saying to my boss, I'm not an accountant. I don't think you can give me that title. And he said, it's not your title, it's the role you're doing. I'm like, okay. But then suddenly there was that fear that I don't, you're all qualified financial people and I'm not. Like, I don't know that I know what I'm doing here. It was completely self generated. There was not a single thing when I reflect back that any of my team or my boss did that would tell me that I didn't know what I was doing. But it was my fear. And I think it always comes back to fear. It was absolutely my fear that I would get found out and that they would realize that I had no freaking idea what I was doing. And I remember asking and sort of saying, can you take me through how to do an MPV? Like, what's net present value? What does it mean? I don't know what it means. And sort of it was kind of this, oh, yeah, okay, all right, I'll take you through this. And you could see them kind of think, oh, God, she doesn't know this. And so that added to my, oh, God, I don't really know what I'm doing here. I shouldn't be in this job. This isn't right. And it got to the point where I got such a fear of being found out. And the fact that I was doing my job day to day was beside the point. I had this fear of being found out as a fraud that I stopped asking questions. And so when I was given a task to do that I didn't know how to do, I didn't ask anybody. And I didn't tell them that I didn't know how to do it. And I shoved these boxes of files under my desk and I pretended that I was doing the job. I was doing my day job, but there was this other thing that was lurking. It was giving me nightmares. It really was. And it wasn't until literally the day before this task was due that my boss sort of said to me, "Have you done it?" And I was like, no. Why not? Because I don't know how. And he's like, why didn't you ask? Why didn't you say? It's like, well, I didn't want you to know that I didn't know how to do it. And when you say that out loud, I didn't want you to know that I didn't know how to do it. It's like, well, how silly is that? But at the time, I thought that would be construed as a negative on me and that I wasn't doing a good job if I didn't know how to do this one thing. And look, it ended up, as always happens, everybody knuckles in and helped me get the job done, and we got it done, if not on time, then very close to time. But it was a massive lesson to me. It was a huge lesson to me. And not long after that, I met with somebody who'd recently been promoted into a very senior role at a very young age. And I remember talking to him, and it was interesting because it was a male. And I remember talking to him and sort of, we were congratulating him on his new role and how exciting it was. Um, and I'd told him this story about what I'd done and not admitted I didn't know how to do this thing. And he looked at me and he said, "Do you think that everybody doesn't have those moments? Do you think that everybody doesn't have those moments where they don't know what they're doing? They're making it up as they go along. They're doing the best they can do, and they're asking silly questions." I was like, "Well, you don't. No, look at the position you're in." He's like, "Yeah, absolutely, I do every other day. Every day I have a question and I think I'm an idiot. I should know this." And I kind of looked at him and thought, "Oh, you do as well." And for me, that was a real turning point. That was a real turning point to understand that actually it's normal. And so that's where I will often now say, I'm going to ask the dumb question, or this might not be a sensible question, or this might have been asked before and I've missed it, but could somebody please tell me, or do I know? And so for me, that was a really pivotal thing. And I do wonder now, if it had been a woman who had said that, would that have had such a pivotal impression on me? Because to have a man in a senior position say to me, "I have imposter syndrome. I doubt myself every day. There are things that I don't know how to do, or there's things that I'm worried I don't know how to do." That was such a pivotal moment. And so for me now, I have days where I go, wow, like I'm having this conversation. Do I know enough to have this conversation? And there are times when I think I ask the question differently now. I think I ask the question of myself, do I know enough to make this decision, or do I need advice or input or help? As opposed to assuming that I should know. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's a very good way. That's a very good spin to it, right?
yeah, yeah. It's just, I think it's helped me to identify, oh, actually, you know what, you should know this. And going on to another little pet project, and that's being a woman of a certain age. And menopause has hit me, and there are things that I'm forgetting. I never used to forget things. I remembered things, and I would tell you the conversation we had 3 months ago. And now I'm like, oh, did we talk about this? Was I in this conversation? Like, was I? So, I take copious notes and I say to people, look, I'm really sorry. I'm taking notes because I may not remember this, which is a terrible thing to admit. But, I'm very open about saying I'm a woman of a certain age. And I think if we stop thinking about imposter syndrome as being, I'm a fraud, to being, do I know the answers that I need to know right now? Who can help me with those? And just trying to change the languaging on it a little bit, it stops it from being all about me, and being about the situation rather than a personal, I've done this wrong or I don't know how, so therefore. So yeah, for me, it's very much around changing the way you look at things.
Awesome. This is amazing. So, what will be your advice to teachers who wish to transition into technology sector?
Do it. Take a leap. If you are now, I'm not advocating everybody leave teaching. That's not that's not what I'm doing. But if you are somebody who is looking for a new challenge and you think that you want to get out of teaching, and look, let's be honest, teaching's hard. Teaching is a really hard profession, and there's a number of really tough professions out there, and that's one of them. And I think for me, if somebody thinks they want to give it a go, one of the things that was hard for me, and I guess this is where my tenacious personality comes through, is when I came back to New Zealand, I went to a recruiter with my CV and said, look, I have been told that as a teacher, there are jobs available to me. What are they? Like, what could I do? And I will say that that recruiter put me off big time. That recruiter was kind of like, oh, yeah, thanks for that. We'll give you a call if we think of anything. I was kind of like, oh, I really kind of thought you'd help me out here and you'd give me some guidance and you'd say, well, if you beef up this part of your CV or talk to us about what you've done with this or what do you know about that? That I really thought that they would be the ones who would help me with that. And they didn't. They really didn't. And they literally took my CV and went, yeah, we'll be in touch. And I was like, okay, that's it. So I kind of sat on my thumbs for a month or so thinking, I haven't heard anything. And then I realised that actually I just was the person who had to just start applying for jobs. And so I did. I looked at Seek and I started applying for jobs. And it leads to a bit of a funny story, really. I'm full of funny stories. Um, when I applied for the job here at BNZ, I had no idea what it was I was applying for. My sister works in IT, and so I showed her the job. And she's like, "Yeah, I reckon you can do all of that stuff." So she helped me write my letter and fit my CV to the role. And so then I spent the night before reading through everything I could find on the internet about projects and project management because I was applying for the job as a project coordinator. So what was this all about? What was this world of projects? Because a project, as far as I knew as a teacher, was a very different thing. And so I came into the interview and I advocate out to people, never assume if you can't or haven't done what they're asking for that you can't do the job. Because I came into that interview and I kid you not, I think I said no to every single question they asked. Have you ever? No. But my answer was never just no, no, no. The reality was they would say, have you ever used Microsoft Project? Like, have you used Microsoft Project? Do you understand how that works? Because that's going to be a key tool that you'd have to use in your job. And my answer was, well, no, I haven't used that specific tool, but I've been teaching Microsoft applications for the last few years. So I reckon if you give me half a day, I'll work it out. Have you? Well, I haven't, but I do know how to do this, which I think is fairly similar. And so I had none of the experience they wanted. I had none of the specific tools they were asking for, but I had other experiences that I would bring into the conversation. Say, well, I think I've done this that applied, and I got the job. I walked out of that interview, and I remember saying to my sister, because she was expecting me to come out, sort of saying, that wasn't good. I'm not going to get the job. But it was an experience. Whereas I came out of that interview and I said to her, I reckon I've got the job. She's like, oh, did it go really well? I went, well, no, I didn't know how to do any of it, but I reckon I've got the job. I don't know why I thought I had the job. So, but I did get the job, and I think it was because I had a connection with the two people that were interviewing. It was because I brought my personality, I brought who I am, and I brought that energy and enthusiasm to learn about the job that they were talking about. And I had enough of the base skills that they were looking for. I was technically competent. I could use Excel. I could get into Microsoft applications, and I could work with people. So that was enough. They could teach me the skills because I had those broader skills that they were looking for. And so, for me, I think there's a little bit about being ballsy, and there's a lot about how you answer and how you present yourself that enables you. So that's a little bit of a long
Yeah.
story around.
So, what would be your advice to people like myself who want to move into leadership roles within technology?
Everybody's a leader would be my first point. And one of the mistakes that people make, I believe, is that they think they have to have direct reports or be in a leadership role to be a leader. And I would dispute that. And I would say everybody can be a leader and everybody should be a leader. And the way to get into a leadership role is by being a leader, no matter the position you hold. And so, there used to be talked about a lot more than there is now, the whole leading without authority. And that's very much the position that we all hold, because even in a leadership position such as I've got, I don't always have the authority, but I take the leadership position. Being a leader and demonstrating leadership, I think, are really, really critical skills. And I think that, we talk about having business acumen and we talk about having key tool skills and that sort of thing. But leadership is one of the key skills that I think if you grow and develop your leadership capabilities, you will get spotted from a mile away because too many people don't show those. And so demonstrating those in a way which is reaching out to your colleagues, which is volunteering to be part of the DEI group, which is volunteering to support somebody in their career journey, it all gets noticed. And often it feels like the things you do don't get noticed, but they do. They really do. And so if you're thinking about your performance conversation at the end of the year, we talk about the things we've delivered and we talk about the actions we've taken. We also need to talk about the leadership we've shown and the leadership that the activities we've led by being a good, strong leader, because you don't need to be a leader to be a leader. And so for me, that's point number one around growing your career and getting into a more senior position at not just at the bank, but in any organization. And I think one of the other aspects of that is important is having the advocates and the sponsors who understand that actually, I think I'm ready to grow my career and I'd like your help. And you can be as overt as that. I want to grow my career. I want to progress to the next role, or I want to look at something over there, or I want the next opportunity. And whether you know what that opportunity is or not, you need to be really clear with those people, because if they know, then hopefully they'll be really honest with you and say, do you know what? I think you're ready for that. And I'm absolutely going to help you with that. How can I help? What can I do? Or they're going to be exceedingly honest with you and say, you know what? I think you will be a good leader, but I actually don't think you're ready for that right now. I really think if you work on these things, or you focus on this aspect of your career, or you look at, leaning into this, then I reckon you'll be ready for that. And that's what you need, is those people who are going to be honest with you, and those who are going to help you and say, look, I know somebody that can help you with that. I'm not the right person, but I know somebody that can help you with that. And most people are pretty generous with their time if you ask. If you don't ask, you won't get.
Awesome. Great. If you don't ask, you don't get. That's a really cool statement.
I think it's how I've based my whole career, to be honest. I think that's been the core tenet for me.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle. It was just a great conversation. I just love your enthusiasm, the energy that you bring into this conversation. Any last thoughts, final thoughts before we close off?
I knew you were going to ask me that. For me, probably that last statement about if you don't ask, you don't get is that point. There are so many things we can do, but you need to let people know what it is you're aspiring for, because we're not mind readers and we don't know that you're looking for this from us. And so talking around the topic, or being subtle about something, is not always going to work. And so for me, it's around being really overt and being really clear, but not taking things personally, because everybody is busy. And I have people who come and ask if I'll mentor them, and I'd love to mentor them, but I've already got 3 mentees, or I've got 5 mentees, or I've got, this other thing that I'm doing. And so now's not the right time, but I'll help you find the person who can. And so for me, it is very much around that: take ownership, take accountability, and ask. Because the worst that somebody is going to say to you is no, and you lose nothing by somebody saying no to you. And so it's hard. It's really hard to do that. It's really hard to put yourself out there. But I think the advantages that you get from that by far outweigh the discomfort that it takes. And if you need to, get someone along with you to help you have that conversation. Like, you don't have to do it on your own. Get 2 or 3 of you together and go, hey, we'd really like to meet with you to talk about X, Y, Z. And by the way, would you be my mentor? And so, because people are just absolutely honoured to be asked to help. And we all want to help others. We just don't always think about it. And so for me, it's put it out there. Let us know that that's what you want. Let us know so that we can give you that honest feedback about whether we think you're ready for that, and we can help you into that. And so for me, that's probably, it's not always about you. It's not always about me. There's so many other things that come to play that might lead to a yes or a no decision, but it never hurts to ask.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle, for your time. I know you're such a busy woman and you still made
Never
time,
too
like
busy.
almost 1.5 hours now. Thank you so much. And we'll be delighted to carry on with this conversation again, I'm sure, in future.
That's great. Thanks for asking, Mina. And I think it's an amazing thing that you're doing here. And I'm very excited that you're helping us at BNZ also with our DEI journey and making sure that we've got our focus on the right things. So I'm excited to be working with you. And thanks for asking.